you got to start with the offensive line. I feel like when you talk about Sherrone, but also when you talk about this Michigan offense, because it's kind of built from there out. And Jim Harbaugh saying at Big Ten Media Day, they have 10 starting caliber guys. Sherrone Moore said, yeah, it's 10, maybe 11 or 12. So they could be, even deeper than maybe we thought based on what he's seeing so far during fall camp. But, he said some of those offensive line competitions, those position battles at left tackle, right tackle, and even center could last throughout fall camp. He doesn't necessarily have a set date on when he wants those to be settled. Obviously you want to get your guys to gel together, but he said these guys are so close, on and off the field that he's not too worried about that. He wants the competition to bring out the best in everybody, feels that is happening right now. And he did mention, he said, yeah, we'll figure it out, by the first game or first couple games. He kind of slipped that in there. And it's kind of another indicator of what Harbaugh talked about at Media Day, that some of these position battles could go into the season. You have a light non-conference schedule, starting with East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green. You could see some maybe rotation there if things aren't settled. But, he said we have 4 starting tackles. Harbaugh talked about the 2 starting centers with Drake Nugent and with Greg Crippen there. But specifically tackle. He talked about Ladarius Henderson, his transition from Arizona State, but not only that, his transition from playing guard the last 3 years to going back to tackle, where he played as a freshman in 2019 there in the Pac-12. So he said it's a process. It's going to be an adjustment. He's only 7 practices into it. He didn't join the team until the summer, but he's going through it. I guess your take on kind of these comments, on the offensive line, that basically things are, where they were when fall camp started. The competitions are raging on.
Yeah, and of course, a couple days ago, I think it was maybe Tuesday or I believe it was Tuesday was the first full day in pads. And that's where we've talked about this before too. That's where, everyone kind of starts hitting their stride in terms of what these battles are going to look like, who pulls ahead in the pecking order. Once everyone's out of shorts and t-shirts, it's game on. And this is where, we're still kind of operating out of the belief that, Jim Harbaugh's probably going to be gone the first few games of this year. This is where, you look for, where does Michigan find that edge? Even without the Jim Harbaugh suspension, how does this team find the edge after doing what they've done these last 2 seasons? And the fact that there are still so many important jobs up for grabs, and probably will be in the early stages of the year, to me adds a little bit of juice to a non-conference schedule that would otherwise, just like last year, not really do a whole lot for people, and certainly will kind of be roasted nationally. But, as far as the offensive line goes, we've continued to operate out of the belief that it will be Henderson that winds up winning this job. I think the fact that he did, there's a clear plan for him, right? When you bring in a guy who's played guard for the last 3 years and you bring him into your program and the expectations that he's there to start, I think that they clearly believe he can be the guy for them at left tackle. Of course, he did play that in his freshman season at Arizona State. So again, it's all about hitting that stride and finding your comfort level with those guys up front. To me, I know, a lot's been made about the numbers game and, we have as many as 10 guys that can start. To me, it's really that right tackle spot that intrigues me. Now, if Henderson stumbles, could I see a scenario where maybe Carson Barnhart's your left tackle and then you have those other guys figuring it out on the other side? I could see that. But to me, I think that's really the battle to me, because even the center spot to a certain extent, I think that is I think Drake Nugent is basically a shoe-in for that as well.
Yeah.
But right tackle, Trente Jones, Miles Hinton, Carson Barnhart, I would have Barnhart ahead of all 3 of them. But it's good to hear that it's been good competition. sometimes that's coach speak, and then, some of the intel comes out and you hear, oh, well, this guy's actually pretty clearly ahead, and the rest of it is all just kind of, we'll see what happens. But it's good to hear that in these first few days, it has been true competition. And, if you want to spot on this offensive line, if your name isn't Zach Zinter or Trevor Keegan, you got a lot of work to do the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I don't think it's coach speak either, because we've seen all these guys play college football, whether it's at Michigan or elsewhere, a few guys coming in from the Pac-12. And Sherrone Moore was asked about that too. I mean, how do you weigh guys like Carson and Trente, the fact that they've played in this system, they understand it, they know the expectations. How do you balance that against, some of the guys that are coming in? They're a little bit newer. do you maybe go with the experience, the guys you know a little bit better? And Sherrone said, no, it's all about the tape. It's all about who's playing better in practice, and then eventually who plays better in the game. So it's not like those guys have a leg up inherently, but at the same time, they're talented. I don't worry about Ladarius Henderson picking up the playbook. I talked to him, I think the day he committed back in December, and I was asking him about that, how Olu Olutimi came in so prepared. He knew the playbook by the time spring ball began, last year. And he said that he doesn't think that's going to be a problem for him. He came in as a freshman in 2019 at Arizona State, started at left tackle, as we mentioned, but also he said he was teaching some other guys the playbook that had already been there for a couple of years by the time fall camp rolled around. So, he's definitely a smart kid. He is a worker. So I don't worry about that, but I do think if he wins that job, it's going to be earned. If he, wins it and then somebody else ends up taking over, you feel like you have enough behind him where it's not too much of a concern. So it's not a huge worry for me, although I do think it is an adjustment, as Sherrone Moore said, with him going back to tackle after 3 years at guard. But, yeah, that's kind of where the offensive line stands at this point. He was trying to ask about Drake Nugent, but they ran out of time, so didn't get a ton on the centers. But the tackles, it sounds like things are raging on. And the interesting thing about the tackle battle, too, is that they play into each other. Like the left tackle battle, if Carson Barnhart doesn't win there, he could win right tackle, that sort of thing. Let's move on to wideouts, though, skill position players. J.J. McCarthy said this week, as we talked about on Monday, that Tyler Morris is going to make a big name for himself. Sherrone Moore was kind of listing the wide receivers, and in that top trio, he lists Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson, Tyler Morris. And then he says, you also got the, Darius Clemens. Then you talked about the freshmen, how they're explosive. They're making some plays, flashing early on in practice. But I think it's more validation or more confirmation that Tyler Morris is kind of right there right now.
He is. And, like I said, known commodities at the top of the depth chart. To me, it's really been a matter of, is Tyler Morris going to be the guy? And he slides into the slot, and then you have Roman and Cornelius on the outside, or does Darius Clemens come out of nowhere and then all of a sudden Roman Wilson kicks to the inside? And so they have options there. That could still happen in certain configurations, but everything we've heard about Tyler Morris is that the chemistry is obviously built in with JJ McCarthy. Those are well plowed grounds at this point. It's almost becoming the new hey, did you know that Matthew Stafford and Clayton Kershaw were high school baseball, pitcher catcher, whatever it was. So we've got all that ground covered, right? But Tyler Morris, he's going to be a guy for this team that I think is comfortably just going to be. First off, I think he's going to find a knack, just be one of those guys that has a knack for getting open. And maybe he's not like a number one. Maybe he doesn't wind up being a number one wide receiver before his college career is over. But he is a guy that is going to find seams in the defense. He's going to could be one of those type of zone buster type of guys where you just sit where the soft coverage is and move the chains and get open, run good routes, all of that. So the fact that, it doesn't feel like manufactured hype with him. I think the fact that, he is a year removed or a couple years removed now from that ACL injury, he's got the opportunity ahead of him. He's got the familiarity with the quarterback. It's good to see that he is still continued to shine. I really do think he has a chance to be an extremely quality player for this Michigan offense.
No doubt. I think you mentioned the ACL injury. I feel like people, because of that, he suffered that in the spring of his senior year of high school, and then or it might have been his junior year or going into his senior year because they pushed back his junior season and then had to miss the senior year. But he dropped in the rankings a little bit. He wasn't a guy people talked about as much when he was a recruit at the end after he committed to Michigan. But this was a guy who was in the top 100. This is a guy that even finished in the top 150, top 200 on every single service. So he's got a lot of talent. I think that's the case too for Darius Clemens. But right now you continue to hear more about Tyler Morris a little bit. And then I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Roman Wilson, who my guy. I feel like I've been saying this guy's going to lead the team in receiving. People know that have listened. But Sherrone Moore with some strong comments there saying he's had a phenomenal camp so far. He thinks he's going to take a next step, that his leadership has really been a lot, not better, but just increased, given the fact that he's a senior now. Ronnie Bell's gone, and he's had to step up in that regard. He loves his swagger, he said, that he brings. And I think we all kind of know what that is with Roman Wilson. He brings a little extra juice out there. But I continue to, feel good about feeling that Roman Wilson's going to be, the lead guy for this team. And Sherrone Moore did mention too, he doesn't want it to be one go-to guy. He wants it to be where everybody is an option to make big plays.
You want it to be a pick your poison type of offense. And that means, one, like, we know that this Michigan team doesn't have they don't have Marvin Harrison Jr. So it's not going to be a non-negotiable where you have a guy that you need to make sure he gets X amount of targets. I think depending on the given week, it could be Cornelius Johnson. It could be Roman Wilson. It could be Colston Loveland or Tyler Morris or what have you. But Wilson's intriguing to me. And this is the thing that's a little, I don't want to say it's been overblown, the lack of talent in the wide receiver room, but I think Cornelius Johnson was a 4-star recruit. Roman Wilson was a 4-star recruit. Tyler Morris was a 4-star recruit. So they do have talent there. It's time to develop those guys a little bit better. But on the topic of Roman Wilson, I just need him to be a little more consistent. And I feel like that's something I've been harping on the last couple of years. He has been a guy, think back to last season. He had 3 touchdowns on his first 4 touches period of the year. They got him involved a little bit, in some of the gadget plays and in the run game. Obviously, we know what he can do as a deep threat. We saw that in the TCU game. It just seemed like between non-conference play and that TCU game, and I think there was a concussion or a wrist injury or something in there at some point that kind of hampered him a little bit. But you need a little bit more from him on a week-to-week basis. You know what I mean? And it's gonna be interesting to see how they use him, because I think he can be, I think he can be a deep threat. I think he can be someone who, does some damage on a slant over the middle of the field. I think you can probably get away with handing off the ball to him a time or two, doing some creative things with him. So using him, all this conversation has been about using Blake Corum and using Donovan Edwards more creatively. I really do think there's a lot more you can do with Roman Wilson, because right now, and we'll see, but at least from a straight line speed perspective, he might be the most explosive player on this team. It's just a matter of putting everything else together.
Yeah, he might be the fastest. He's a great route runner. I think they needed to use him more last season, and he did have that concussion that he suffered at Iowa, forced to miss the Indiana game. And really, and Isaiah Hull, our friend from Wolverines Wire, brought this up to Sherrone Moore during the press conference, that injuries have hindered him in the middle of both of the last 2 seasons. He had the hand injury suffered in practice, back in 2021. Then last year he has a concussion at Iowa. But I'm looking on PFF here, his targets. I think his inconsistency has more to do with kind of the way they used him and the way he was the slot. And we know that they ran multiple tight end sets more than half the time last year, so he's not always on the field. But his targets were, going game by game, starting with week 1, 2, 1, 4, 5, 6. That's the Iowa game. 5 when he returns against Penn State, but then 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, and then 6 against TCU in the Fiesta Bowl. And we know that was a massive game. He also had a rushing touchdown, and he should have had another receiving touchdown had the refs not blown the call. So when they use him more, I feel like those are the games where he pops. He had 2 huge touchdowns in the red zone at Penn State 2 years ago. He might have to do that again in Happy Valley on November 11th this year if Michigan wants to come out of there alive. So, excited to watch Roman Wilson this year. Talking to Ben Herbert, too. He said he's bigger. I think we've seen he's up to 192 now. So excited about that. Balance on offense continues to come up, and it doesn't feel like it's just a talking point anymore. At this point, Jim Harbaugh's always said they want to be balanced, but he's also always said, hey, we're going to do what it takes to win. There are multiple ways to travel. You can travel on the ground. You can travel through the air. But Sherrone Moore said,
by land, sea, or air is by the way I believe he put it.
Right. So I think he referenced, General Patton is, he would go on the ground, right? And I get it, and I actually kind of like it because you're doing what it takes to win these games. And as I've said plenty of times this offseason, I think ultimately that's what they're going to do when the season starts. They're going to care less about what that split looks like and more about how many points are on the board, if they're converting on third downs, if they're getting it done in the red zone, that sort of thing. But it doesn't feel like a talking point anymore. Sherrone Moore saying, yeah, we want to be 50-50. He's, and he was asked, is this a change from years past? And he said, well, you always want to be balanced, but, and he said, you just figure out how to do that or whatever. Reading into that, it does feel like it's much more of a concerted effort. And I will say it's not just that, because, I think they realize that the pass game has to be better to win some of those bigger games in the playoff and everything. But also I think they have some more confidence in the pass game this year. So that's going to play a huge factor as well. The fact that you have a second-year starting quarterback. Your take on everybody pretty much echoing the company line, and the fact that we already heard earlier in the week that they started camp coming out throwing quite a bit, working on pass rush, working on the pass game offensively.
It's good to hear that they're repping it a lot. I still have my doubts that this is going to be a team that is that 50-50 balance. I think push comes to shove, as we've said several times, they are going to want to control the line of scrimmage. They are going to want to pound other teams with the run game. And if you're going to put someone in the box to try and stop the run, that's when they'll try to attack you from there. History has obviously shown that, if Georgia's the school that you're looking to supplant, think about that Alabama team that beat them a couple of years ago, again, at least in the SEC championship game, you got them with some of those big plays over the top. And I think the fact that they had to, Blake Corum goes down last year, and by virtue of that, you kind of have to change your identity a little bit. I know that they still found ways to piece together the run game, and Donovan Edwards was still there, but a lot more was put on J.J. McCarthy's shoulders, and I think there was some genuine concern about that. Until this time last year was about the time when J.J. started ascending, but remember, he missed all of the spring with the shoulder injury. He didn't really compete for that job until fall camp. And early on in that camp, we had heard that, turnovers and ball security and just not having the finer points down yet was an issue for him. So he finally surges. He takes over the job. You get through the regular season, still mostly within the framework of what you had been doing, right? And then, those last few games, you need more out of him. And I think you've got a lot of answers in terms of what you could put on his shoulders. I think JJ basically won them the Ohio State game, with some of the plays he made through the air. I think that he was the reason that they even had a chance to win the TCU game. If there was another quarterback in there, you probably get run off the field in that one. So knowing that you have that weapon that, again, and I have no issue saying this might be a hot take, but when push comes to shove, I think that J.J. McCarthy is probably your best and most dangerous offensive player because he does handle the ball so much. So the fact that they are, I don't buy that they're going to be completely balanced, but the fact that they are taking the passing game so seriously, they know what it's going to take to reach that next gear. And I think really what it is you want to be able to zig when your opponent zags in terms of adjustments made on the field, taking what the defense gives you. Everyone and their grandmother knows that you're going to have to try and stop the run to beat Michigan. But if you take away the run, which again, the stats sort of say otherwise, but Ohio State kind of did take the run away against Michigan. And when Michigan had to make plays through the air, it did until late in that game. So yeah, to be able to do all of those things, the only way that you can be adept at any of it is if you rep the hell out of it. We know they can run the football. They've done it as good as anyone in the country that isn't a service academy the last 2 years. So that work being put in is a positive for them. Yeah,
no doubt. It's about having answers, right? It's the same thing that I remember Mike McDonald talking about when he came in with defense, 2 years ago, that they were going to have the answers to, counter what the offense is presenting. It's kind of the same thing a little bit with the defense. And Sherrone Moore said, yeah, we want to be 50-50, but there are going to be some games when we're not. And when the defense takes one thing away, we're going to be able to do the other. And that's, exactly what you're talking about, AB.